Thanks, Wayne. Thank you, everyone. Hello and welcome. Great to have you here on a Friday night and so late. It's quite amazing. Um, in 2003, I was in my third year of engineering, and I'd spent 2 weeks preparing this case to change out of my university degree. And I walked into this meeting with my course coordinators, and I was essentially lobbying to move out of my engineering course and into this other business course. And I remember I walked out of the room after like 45 minutes of arguing with this woman, and I was really defeated. I felt quite overrun by the fact that I had this idea that everything that I'd been working towards, I decided that I wanted to change direction in my life, and that I wanted to go down the path of shifting from engineering to business, and my university wouldn't let me. They said like I was so far through my course, it wasn't worth it. They said that my course was so drastically different in engineering through to transfer across to business, I wouldn't see any of that recognized. And basically they told me that it was a bad idea. And I felt like it was like bureaucracy, once again, placing me in an area where I didn't need to be and I didn't want to be. I wasn't having my needs met, and it wasn't responding to the change that I wanted in my life. And that was frustrating. Has anyone else ever like been in a situation where they've wanted to change course in their life, where they've sort of had to look around and had to think and decided, wait, maybe this is not where I'm supposed to be, and maybe there's something else out there? Yeah? Yeah. There you go. I remember asking, before here, I asked my mum, like, hoping for something, like if there was like a time where I wanted to change the world or had like high aspirations, and she said, you know what, the biggest thing is like you just spent a lot of time quietly observing and asking like, what are we here for, and what is this all about? So anyway, in 2003, I was relatively frustrated. A really interesting year. It was a couple of years into an Australian first, which was this Bachelor of Business Entrepreneurship course that was being run at RMIT. It was the first undergraduate bachelor's degree in entrepreneurship of its time in Australia, and it was a big deal. It was a big deal because if you were like me and you were industrious and like to dream and like to build businesses, and that was your thing, then this was like a great place to not only go and explore the academic side of entrepreneurship and business, but to be around like-minded people and to experience what it's like to be in a high-paced entrepreneurial environment. And I was super excited about that, but I didn't know about the course when I got into my engineering degree, and so I started engineering and computer science. And at the end of my computer science and engineering degree, I was a little bit disillusioned as to what I was going to do next. I had a feeling that I was going to start a business. And on reflection, it's no wonder that I felt that way. I feel like my entire life up until that point, I had been told that the future was uncertain, that technology was moving very, very quickly. The statistic they used to throw around when I was in high school was that 2/3 of the jobs that all of y'all are going to have in the future don't exist today. 2/3 of the jobs. And I sat there looking around and I was thinking, well, if the jobs aren't here, someone must have to create those jobs. And I thought, well, if they're not there right now, and everyone in this room sort of is of the opinion that the current state of sort of jobs and current state of employment and current state of companies isn't going to be the future, then how does that future get made? And I think that sort of sowed the seed, this idea in me that entrepreneurship and creating and innovating was something that was like ultimately important, and that was almost like destined to be our future. If you think about us in Australia, our major economic makeup is around mining and export. Now, I'm an engineer, but I'm not the sharpest guy when it comes to economics. But ultimately, if that's a non-renewable resource, then that's gonna change one day. And we're going to need to think about what's post our mining career. So in my mind, with 2/3 of our jobs not yet predefined, with a major economic resource in Australia slowly drying up, and looking around at the state of things, it was not a lot of certainty in the future, I could see that things were going to change and that we needed a space to cultivate innovation. A space to cultivate innovation was what I started to seek. And at that time, if you wanted to be a part of something innovative, if you wanted to be a part of something that was like fast moving and fast paced, then you had the choices of something like a university, or there wasn't a whole lot else. Like this is incredible out here to be in this library where there's like, this is a co-working space essentially. There's like free Wi-Fi, there's laptops, there's ping pong tables, there's community gathering around. It's quite fascinating. This is my first time to the library, and it's really quite special to see this. But certainly back in those days, there was nothing like that. And so after university, I started a company, and around 2009. There was a bit of a shift happening in the Melbourne community. A lot of these previously isolated communities were starting to assemble. Twitter started to become very, very popular, especially amongst a specific type of person, especially amongst those people who were really into connection and really into seeing what was out there. So these were like innovative people, big thinkers, people who kind of wanted to change the status quo. And I felt like we were all on that path of like deciding, sort of making or like creating or cultivating that innovation and what was ahead for us. And so it was an amazing time. I had this small company that I'd started, and we were in this office. It was an officey office. It was quite a boring office in Cremorne, which is just across the way from Richmond. And it was a 77 square meter office. So the entire office was not much larger than this room. But our team was quite small, and I had these ideas of like, okay, what if we were able to bring in some people and really start to cultivate some of the innovation that I was starting to feel in amongst our communities? So Melbourne was mobilising. The community in Melbourne was mobilising. There were unconferences like Trampoline where people came together, and it was an ideas peer-led conference, which means that at the start of the conference, everyone would come and they would opt into a session in a room at a time slot, and you could talk about whatever you wanted. So it was like ultimately peer driven. The attendees, basically shaped the content, and they were the ones that were delivering the sessions in this conference. And that was awesome because it meant that if you were there, then you were either wanting to really seek out what everyone else was doing in a creative way, or you were there to deliver your big, bold idea. And that was really exciting for me. There were those types of communities mobilising around Melbourne in 2009. And I thought, how cool would it be to bring them all together into my office? And so, sort of started to work at that and started to invite people back to this space. Ultimately, with the vision of like cultivating a space to allow like entrepreneurship and innovation to thrive. Like I really wanted to build this future that I knew that wasn't ahead of us. So we really wanted to build the future that saw 2/3 of the jobs that didn't exist yet become a reality. And so in 2009, we started this community. And very, very soon, this community started to grow and grow and grow. People just started to come into our little office, like people that I didn't know, people that they were all lovely. It was amazing. It wasn't like they were nasty types. They were fantastic people, because it was a groundswell. There was a word of mouth that was starting to spread around, and people started to hear about this concept. And it was fantastic. Like when people now come to me and talk about starting a co-working space, they say, hey, I've got this amazing space down in the Docklands. It's a library space. It's got sophisticated theatres with very, very bright lights and ping pong tables and all the rest. And they say, what do I do now? And I say, well, just forget all that. Forget all the space, because the space doesn't matter. It's all about the people. And so for us in our early days, we had a terrible, crappy office. It was not lovely to be there. We had probably a crappy ADSL connection. We had mold growing on the wall at one stage just because there was a leaking pipe somewhere, and our landlord wasn't very attentive. It was a disaster, but our people loved it. Like everyone who was there just loved being there. And how do you measure that? How did I know that people loved it? I knew because our community was like giving back. They were like taking responsibility for things that they didn't need to. For example, some of them bought a barbecue so that we could have barbecues every Friday and invite not just our members of our co-working space around, but everyone in the neighborhood and everyone in the greater community to come and be a part of it. People would like look after the place so the mold got removed, and I didn't remove it, somebody else did. Little things like that. People would bring cookies, and like we saw all these little parts of our community pop out and develop in ways that was quite amazing. Something magic happens when you get a community together. Communities aren't the answer to everything, obviously, but they do solve a lot of problems in different ways that you may not really think when you first intuitively consider it. We used to hold events at our co-working space. And in our first space, which was only a tiny space, and we used to hold tiny events, and eventually the events got bigger and bigger. And when I say events, as in like in those early stages, we used to pick members of our resident community and ask them, hey, do you want to run a workshop on an area of your expertise? For example, how to code a basic website, or how to do a basic social media campaign, or something like that. And everything was resident driven. We call our members of our co-working space residents. And so it was all resident driven. And soon they got too big for our space. And one day we had to move down the pub because it was like 10 minutes before the start, and our tiny space had overflowed with people. There was like another 30, 40 people who were trying to get into our tiny space. And there was short tail signs that things were growing outside of the capacity of our tiny space. And so eventually we moved into another space. We moved into a much larger space. In fact, we've been moving into larger spaces every 18 months since 2009. So our floor space has doubled every 18 months. So if you look at this from a community perspective, it's like, okay, the community is growing. If you look at it from a business perspective, we're growing about 17% month on month in terms of our floor space. So there was really good growth there if you're thinking about it from a business growth perspective, which we weren't, because we're very community focused. And it's always been about the people in the community. So going back to that event, one of the interesting things that happened once, we had an event, and there must have been hundreds and hundreds of people there. And this is like happened fewer times than I can count on one hand, but someone misplaced an iPhone, which is community talk for maybe someone pinched one. And so this young girl had her iPhone stolen, and we found out about it that night. The next morning, a word had gotten around to a few people in our community, and basically by about 11 o'clock, a courier had arrived. And the courier had arrived with a new phone, and everyone in our community had gotten word of what had happened and had chipped in like a nominal amount each. But because there's 100 odd people in our community and the phone is only worth $700, that's like $7 each, or that type of amount that everyone was able to chip in and replace that phone in such a fast turnaround. Now, the amazing things about that are like, obviously it was incredible for the poor person who lost their phone. Just the speed at which that happened, like the pace at which you can allow these sorts of things to repair themselves. It's such a short amount of time. Such $1,000, a $700 phone isn't cheap. Like, these things are important to people, but it really does make a difference when everyone is able to give a little to make a big difference. And so, like, the lesson that I take from that is that communities don't solve problems. Like, there are still nasty things that happen. People still pinch iPhones, but there's a resilience there that you wouldn't get otherwise. So communities allow people to bounce back faster and harder and better than they would have done beforehand. And I can see that sort of thing happening all throughout our growth. Moving forward, so the community that I'm talking about is called Inspire 9. So Inspire 9 is a co-working space. We're actually a series of co-working spaces. Inspire 9 ultimately is a co-working community. So it's a community of people who are innovators, who are looking to change the world and seek out these sorts of spaces to cultivate innovation and allow innovation to thrive. And so that's what our team's remit is to basically cultivate a space and cultivate a community to let these amazing, talented people do their thing. And we develop a set of values around that to help us set that precedent. So everyone who comes in, we try and treat them as if they're a high potential individual. We treat them as if they're there because they're about to do something huge. And we nurture them and nourish them, and we go to town trying to introduce them to everyone that they need to do to get their life's work done. We help them run personal development programs for either anything that they can offer themselves or connect them with people in their community to help them work on their business ideas, help them with their technology, help them market themselves better, help them think about wellness. So everything, we try and take a holistic approach to how we can develop our residents. And development of our residents is actually one of our core metrics as a business. So traditional businesses might measure profit and loss as the single thing that they measure. In Spine9, we have 3 core metrics. So one is resident, personal, and professional development. So we measure how engaged our residents are with these workshops that are provided. And we use that as an indicator as to how engaged they are as the community and how we are going on our path to grow them and to develop them. We also measure community connection. So we call profit and loss business sustainability, because we're not out there to develop a huge thriving company. So business sustainability, ultimately communities need to be sustainable. We're out there for the next 50 years, not for the next 5. And so that looks like having solid underpinnings of operating in our economic environment. That's our business sustainability. Resident, personal, and professional development and growth. And then our final metric is community connection. So we take it upon ourselves to connect as many members of our community as possible. And connection doesn't necessarily mean just coming and joining our community. It more means like connecting members with other members, connecting our wider network with other people, either inside our network, at a mentor level, experts inside of our network, or in the outskirts. So we do our best to try and measure those metrics and report on them monthly. So yeah, our values were shaped around those 3 metrics essentially. So we talk about sharing rather than promoting. We talk about these little nuanced things that are very, very community, very, very people focused, but they have an impact on the way in which we do our job, and they have an impact on the way in which our community interacts with each other. So through sharing and not promoting, it means that someone can't come into the space and start throwing around T-shirts and saying, "Hey, yeah, come on down to my free van and jump on board so and so brand name." You can talk to people about the qualities of your brand name. You can talk to people about the benefits of using it, but raw sales tactics is something that we've vetoed, that we've disallowed, and we haven't disallowed it in terms of making it a firm thing. We just have quiet words, and we just talk the talk and walk the walk. We just basically we do the same with our audience. We with our residents, we make sure that when we're talking about our own brand, that it's always about the quality and the benefits of our products and what we offer, more so than about spruiking who we are and what we do. One of the it's awesome being a part of these communities because you get to hear these awesome stories. In 2010, this guy walked into our co-working space, and his name was Didier. And Didier had come across from Adelaide, where he was running a company there, and we introduced him to 2 founders in the space who were working away at this startup. And Didier had an idea too, and he had a background in running his company over in Adelaide. And so the 3 of them got together and started working this idea, and we watched them ship a whole lot of products. So if you're familiar with startups, there's this whole idea of lean startup theory, which is like building very small bits and pieces and then basically putting them out to market to see how they perform. So there were a lot of things that didn't perform. There were a lot of things that this team shipped that they were wildly passionate about, but they weren't very successful. But eventually, they got a little bit of traction, and then eventually they got a little bit more traction, and eventually they got hundreds and hundreds of users, and they started to get names like Eventbrite and like Square and like Adobe and all these bigger companies started to use their product. And it was quite fascinating that someone who had been part of our community since 2010, fast forward to 2015, this company is a company called Culture Amp, and they have a cloud-based employee engagement solution. They currently have over 200 employees, and they're based across Melbourne and San Francisco, London, and New York. And these three dudes just walked into our community one day, and we introduced them, and they hit it off. And today they've raised over $20 million, and they're one of the sweethearts of the Melbourne startup innovation scene, just because of the success of their company. And you know, it's so amazing to be subjected to that, and to have been a part of watching that happen, and thinking about all the ingredients that came along the way that we're able to contribute to. So super special for us to hear those stories of our community, and watching people grow and cultivate that innovation we're talking about. I mentioned before, our space has been growing and growing. Today we have 2 locations. So we have a Richmond location, which is made up of two floors of this beautiful big old building. It's the AKM building. It's the Australian Knitting Mill building, and I love this concept that once upon a time, 200 years ago, there were sheep being pulled into these like 200-year-old Tasmanian pine floors. And you can see dark spots in the wood where the lanolin from the sheep's wool has seeped in, and it doesn't scrub up the same color as everything else, because you can't bring it back to anything but that. So this building has like these old sentiments, and it looks rugged. And then there's these like high growth, fast moving startups there, you know, fundamentally like underpinned by technology, and you know, nothing that was around, nothing as slow moving as this. So we're like breathing life into this old building, and sort of bringing on this new wave of business, a new wave of what the future is for us as Australians, and for innovation for everyone who's there. Our new space is in Footscray. So we're super excited about having a presence in Melbourne's west. Very, very different cultural background. There's a lot of workers, a lot of makers, a lot of people who work with their hands out there, a lot of people who have worked in industry. They're shutting down the last of the Toyota factory at the end of the month. There's some, you know, huge companies that have operated out of there, and so we have a lot of people whose skills may have become obsolete, or at least they're no longer there and no longer able to make a living from those skills. And so we see this huge opportunity to upskill these people and cross-skill them, like give them new skills, give them an opportunity to, instead of work on a floor where they would put together a car, they can program the robotics, or oversee the robotics that now would put together a car in a modern manufacturing plant. So there's huge opportunities for us to transform the community out that way. Again, thinking about this whole idea of like breathing life into into old buildings. We're in the old Lonely Planet building, so I'm sure that hopefully a lot of you would know Lonely Planet, which is another early Australian startup. Lonely Planet have shifted ownership a few times, and they've moved out of this big, beautiful building by the Maribyrnong River in Footscray. And now we get to take it on, and again, like take on that mission of allowing people to, allowing our community to move in and cultivate the next wave of innovation inside of this big factory. In fact, it's called the Dream Factory, which is pretty fun. So yeah, inside the Dream Factory we have you know, technology businesses. We have a VR lab, so people can start to deal with like cutting edge technology, and we try and make that super accessible. These VR headsets and all the hardware involved would cost thousands of dollars, out of reach of your, you know, early entry level, you know, ideas person, entrepreneur, developer. So we do our best to try and make that super accessible for them. We have a Makerspace, and so a Makerspace is basically a space for hardware makers. So people who want to develop real life products, for example, anything in the IoT market, so Internet of Things. We've had a company in the Inspired On community develop a Wi-Fi enabled light bulb. So it's a light bulb that you could attach to any standard fitting in your house. And you could like control the colors and turn them on and off using your mobile phone, or connect it so that when someone enters the house, and they obviously automatically turn on, or that it flashes every time that you receive a post on Twitter, something like that. So yeah, we've built this amazing cutting edge space over at the Dream Factory, where there's going to be a whole new community of makers. So I feel like back in 2009 we're starting this community, and now we're almost reliving that footstep over on the west side at the moment. It's all new people. We're talking about very, very entry level engagement. So it's like, again, going back to those 20, 30 person workshops on how to build a basic website and all these sorts of things. It's amazing. It's fascinating. So yeah, I guess ultimately the thing that I think is so exciting for me and hopefully you'll get a sense of this is that the sorts of things that happen inside of these spaces is we get to create community. And then the knock-on benefit of that is like amazing things happen inside of communities. We're super resilient. Innovation happens faster. We're able to like cross-pollinate ideas. We can collaborate on projects. We have access to things that otherwise would be out of reach. You can imagine, and only imagine, the mentor networks and investor networks in case you need some funding help for your idea. And Spinone's a really special place to be, and I'm so excited to still be there with it. And if any of you would ever love to come along, I strongly encourage you. We have a large office in Richmond, a large space in Richmond, and a large space in Footscray. So come on down sometime. And thanks.